both so loud. I mean, probably think about the SEC. Almost LSU gets really loud too. Still think at times Florida gets loud. College Station gets loud. But these two schools are it's tough. We need to measure it more often. They should measure it Saturday afternoon.
Right? Preseason discussion. We're spirited about playing in here versus Georgia.
We did.
You never had any desire or wish you would have got a chance to play between the hedges?
No, I mean, obviously, would that have been cool? Of course. This is the tradition here, the rivalry, the passion. I have so much respect for Georgia, this university, what they've done, and I think it would be awesome to play here. I also, I think it's important that I start off by saying that I come from a biased point. So I think it's important to say I am biased in it. Being a boy that was raised in Jacksonville, my parents' first date was the Florida-Georgia game. After we would finish Pop Warner games at Lakeshore, my dad would take me and my brothers, and he'd be like, "Hey, I got $10 if someone's leaving in the fourth quarter, and I can get my boys in." And I can't tell you how many times we did that. Most of the time they would be like, "Oh, take your boys, take our tickets, go." We go to see games, and so I also think that just is such a part of my background personally. But then I think try to view from a non-biased standpoint, and you look at what are there maybe 3 games in the country that are like that, and obviously this is a unique, exciting play, but also you get to offer the recruits, and I know it's such a big point for Kirby when he explained it. I totally got it. I said, man, I get your points. He wants one more weekend here every other year and I also admire that to a certain extent, because that just shows the focus that he has on recruiting, and he thinks, I have one of these kids, just a few more hours here, I'm gonna get him. I love that about him, but I also think a neutral site split 50-50, I think it's pretty cool too. So I can totally see both sides. Now, which one, if I had to vote, would I vote for? But that's probably pretty easy.
Speaking of votes, you will have a Heisman Trophy vote.
Yes, sir.
What are your thoughts about where Hendon Hooker is at in the race, and is it over for Stetson Bennett, or
no?
Could he still...
It's absolutely not over for Stetson Bennett. I think so much of the of what has people done for you lately create hype for them, and that's what gets talked about. I do not believe just in that. I watch every player that is a contender. I watch every single play, literally every single play. I don't care if it's a Stanford game or whoever else. I don't just look at the stats. I will watch every play, and I think Stetson has had a very good season. I think he has. Do I think he's right there? Did he get there? The chance. If he plays great tomorrow afternoon, Kentucky SEC championship game, you can absolutely make a statement. And just because of what he's done, too, you're always rooting for him, and kind of that fire and his toughness, and just a good boy. Just someone that's easy to root for. But if I had to say right now, if I had to vote today, I'd probably lean my kind of 1A towards Hendon Hooker. And I think probably in second would probably be CJ. But I think there's so many guys, you start naming them. I think Blake Corum's in there. I think Bryce still has a shot. I think depending on what happens, I think Brock and Stetson could make some runs in it. And there's multiple other guys that have the ability to get in it. We're just over halfway through the season, and there's so much ball to be played. And so also, Heisman voters, don't put in your vote till the end. So frustrating.
At the beginning of the season,
No, I did have him number 3 in the SEC though to start this season. I think what Coach Heupel is doing is, if you're a quarterback in high school, I'm not saying you have to go there by any means, but I'm saying, and look at Ole Miss with Lane and some of the stuff they're doing and their schemes. Those two places, I feel like if you're a quarterback, the way they use their quarterbacks and put them in situations to succeed, I think you at least have to take a look to say what's behind all this, because those guys are doing an unbelievable job. And what Heupel has done with Hendon and the coaching and the maturation and putting him in positions to succeed, and then the encouragement, believing in him. I think he's done a fantastic job, and then rallying, he show up and play with these teams, but win, beat them as a team. We were there for the Alabama game, but it wasn't. I don't want to say this, disrespectfully, but there's a lot of teams that have lost to Alabama because Alabama walked in and they wore the A. I really believe that before it's ever kicked off. I never felt like that one time a couple weeks ago in Tennessee. It was a different feel. It was the confidence, and that's something that I think starts from a head coach and implementing that culture every day, and that's something he's done, and that's hard. It's really hard to do, and I just don't think, because you can't, quantify that, you can't put a number on that. We don't always talk about it, but it is so important. Those kids, and 17, 18, 19-year-olds, they were believing we're going to go in there and we're going to play with Bama, and we think we can beat them, and it wasn't words to them. That's hard to do.
Where have you seen the biggest favorite, towards the top of the ballot? Where have you seen the biggest growth from last year to this year? Or what's he doing differently?
I think accuracy on the deep ball, he's done really, really well. Early in the season, he missed a few, but man, how many times can you watch now and see him miss one of these? And it's not the easiest throw. You're talking about out and ups, and you're talking about inside of the numbers, kind of seeing posts that he's hitting on the money. His deep ball accuracy is very elite, and he's not missing a lot. It's rare to see him staying inside the system, and but it's really hanging in the pocket and being able to make throws at the last minute, because they do so many stack switch routes. So sometimes it can take a little bit on that release, and he hangs in the pocket till the last moment, and then is really good at throwing with pressure right in his face, which I think is also a key in this game. Georgia needs to get pressure right up in the middle into his face, and Alabama did it a few times. It got right in his face. He can't follow through, and that led to the pick, and I think that's something that going to be there. Couple of times.
Yeah, a lot of things have changed, but what are some of the things that are pretty consistent when you see how the Kirby defense is?
Great defensive line push. Tomorrow on our show, last week against Florida, you would see 4 defensive linemen right at the snap shoot their hands, and you would see 4 offensive line from Florida get stood up. Like, they win the fight at the line of scrimmage, and then their linebackers play fast and downhill. I do think it's for Georgia, I hate it for him. I hate it for Nolan not being in. I think he's one of the best players in the country. So I do think they will really miss him, especially down the stretch. But that's something that's never changed. It's something they did so well, back in the day with the Marcel Dariuses and all those guys. And, and now they just keep regrouping.
Number 88?
Oh, my gosh. Yeah. 88, 78, 90. This defensive line is a joke, and they don't get the love I think they should deserve. It's just winning at the point of attack, and linebackers and their nickels and their safeties can run sideline to sideline and make tackles. And then I think it's the attention to detail. A few times when Florida had one-on-one on the outside, you could see the corners turn and run, and most corners are going to grab and maybe get past interferences, and they turn and get their eyes back just in time. And it's almost like, watching practice as a pro, you can almost hear him saying, the little points he would say, you could see. It's just they're so well coached, and then they have elite athletes at the same time, and that.
Statistically, if you look at it, Georgia's pretty close behind them. Do you think what Todd Monken and company is doing is being overlooked, and if so, why?
Yes, I think probably because it's the way their schedule played out. If they would have played Oregon a couple weeks ago, then they'd probably be having more hype. That was one of the best called games, most efficient games by a quarterback. And I still put as much stock into that because that's a game on your season, right? It wasn't last year. That was this year. And so a lot of people forget. I haven't forgot that game. I think he did a great job. I think then playing South Carolina, and we now know South Carolina is a lot better than people gave him credit for. They just thought, South Carolina's not really good. Well, South Carolina's playing, pretty well. Last week didn't go super good for him, but they're a competitive team, and what Georgia did and just absolutely manhandling and their scheme, I thought was really good. I think there's a few games they didn't execute right after that as well as they probably would have liked. Shoot, they've said that many times, but I just think it'd be silly to underestimate their capability, his ability to have game plans, especially in big situations, and then Stetson's ability to be efficient, to be a playmaker. I think that gets overlooked too. Sometimes we'll think, oh, this is, it's running, play action. This is an offense that when they want has a lot of different options. They're running jet sweeps. They're doing, playing sideline to sidelines. They're at times drop back. They're at times against Oregon, we're going quad formations, and that's something you never used to see out of Georgia. And they have it in their repertoire, and when they need to, they pull it out, and they just don't show it as much as other teams do.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, guys. Awesome. Good to see y'all. Have a good one.
Thanks, Tim.
So you had to play tomorrow, right?
It was kind of perfect.
Everybody, we're in a little bit of a break here before we get Reese Davis. We'll be coming out along with David Pollock. The game day guys, apparently they're in a production meeting and they're letting us know that they're going to be here at about 12:15. Obviously, you heard some comments there from Tim Tebow. And you have to give Monken and Stetson Bennett a lot of credit. I don't know how much that interview you caught with Tebow, but he said, you know what, the Heisman Trophy race, not over yet. I mean, obviously, right now, you've got C.J. Stroud, you've got Hendon Hooker that look like they're the preeminent candidates or the preeminent leaders for the Heisman Trophy. And yet,
so Tim Tebow says, hey, it's not over for Stetson Bennett. If he were to get hot tomorrow, if he were to play well against Kentucky, obviously you have the SEC championship game that's going to factor into the Heisman Trophy race as well. So a lot is still on the table. I thought it was interesting. We had Laura Rutledge at the start of the broadcast as well. And, Laura was talking about the environment here. And certainly we heard a lot from Eric Ainge talking. And I've got a story up on DawgNation right now. You can check out and see some of Eric's comments about the tea and crumpet crowd at Athens and Sanford Stadium. And I was a little surprised. Now, I was covering Tennessee back then when Eric was the quarterback. And Eric was always a bit outspoken. He likes to have some fun. But I think he really means it. I think Tennessee could be in for a bit of a surprise, and I absolutely think that Sanford Stadium is going to factor in this football game. I go back to 2019 and how Notre Dame played in Sanford Stadium. You remember that game? It was decided by less than a touchdown, and the Irish were driving late, and they ran out of time. They had to throw a couple of passes deep late, and part of the reason that they ran out of time was that they had to call 2 timeouts just because of the crowd noise in the second half. They also had 6 motion penalties in that football game. So when I think about games and, crowds factoring in, that's one of the games that I look at and say, you know what, that's a game where the crowd really did make a difference. I absolutely think that the crowd made a difference in 2019, Georgia, Notre Dame. And that's really the last game we've had of this magnitude at Sanford Stadium. Just the way the schedule's worked out. Some of these games have been neutral site. You think about Clemson in Georgia, and that game was in Charlotte, North Carolina. You think about this year's game against Oregon, another one of those marquee matchups, and that game was in Atlanta. Of course, the Georgia-Florida game every year played in Jacksonville. And so the schedule doesn't really allow for a lot of marquee matchups necessarily in Sanford Stadium from year to year. Clearly, this is a case of a historic matchup that, it just seems like it's just kind of snuck up on everyone. When we were talking with Laura Rutledge earlier in this broadcast, Laura was saying, this was a game that was circled, that Game Day and SEC Nation was looking at coming at, but they didn't anticipate a 1-versus-1. And I don't know that anybody could have anticipated a 1-versus-1. It's never happened. It's kind of interesting when you see the College Football Playoff Committee rankings, and there's so much different than the AP and the coaches poll. So in the College Football Playoff rankings, you have Tennessee number 1, Ohio State number 2, and Georgia number 3. And they're saying, they're shrinking it down to this year, and they're looking at metrics. And of course, Tennessee is number 1 in total offense and scoring offense. And yet I looked a little bit deeper at those numbers, and I said, well, now, wait a minute. Georgia's number 1 in red zone efficiency, and Georgia's ranked higher than both Tennessee and Ohio State in third down efficiency. They're getting it done, right? I mean, so which offensive metric do you choose? I suppose the scoring and the yards are the ones that everyone gravitates to. But I'd suggest to you that third down conversion rate is just as important, because that's what keeps your offense on the field and keeps the opposing offense off the field. And we know how Kirby Smart thinks, and he likes to keep opposing offenses off the field. He likes to control the ball. He likes to run plays and wear teams down. So, if Georgia's ranked higher than those teams in third down efficiency, I think Kirby would take that all day over total points, provided that Georgia's undefeated, because that's the most important metric is, are you winning football games? After that, it's style points. And this is where I have a problem with the College Football Playoff Committee. I mean, who are they to decide that an explosive offense and a high-scoring offense is that much better than a very efficient defense like Georgia's that ranks among the elite in points allowed? Why is the points scored more effective than the points allowed metric? If we go back to last year's national championship game, it turned out that Georgia's defense and their ability to keep the Alabama offense neutralized for 3 quarters, Bryce Young only got in the end zone 1 time, and that was the result of a turnover at Georgia's 16. So who's to say that high-scoring, explosive teams should carry that much more attraction? Well, I'll tell you the answer to that question. It's television ratings. Everybody likes offense, right? And that's how we got here with these high-paced offenses that I think looks like backyard football. I mean, you're trying to get lined up and snap it, before your little brother can get lined up. I mean, it seems like almost trickery, like who can get lined up the fastest? It's like a clown act or something where everybody's racing around rapidly to see who can get, lined up right away or so. I mean, this is like, what is this, musical chairs or football? I mean, I think that you should give teams time, certainly from a safety perspective. A lot of these injuries are happening, when players are getting overly tired because of the hurry up. But I know that ship has sailed. I know Nick Saban, when the rules first started to go that way, he kind of contested it. He lost that battle. He adjusted. He shifted. He went offensive. We've seen a lot more offensive teams. And we've seen Kirby Smart do that this year. Because, oh, by the way, in the total offense category, Georgia's number 2, ahead of Ohio State. So, again, Kirby Smart has put together a championship quality football team and staff as much as anything. You look at what Georgia has done after losing 15 players to the NFL, another 13 players in the transfer portal, and it's just unprecedented. No one's ever had to deal with those sort of losses. I mean, the 15 players drafted, that was a record, right? And there was no portal before the last couple of years, much less with 13 players leaving, and 4 or 5 of those guys were in the 2 deep. So, to me, what Georgia's done to get to this point is very impressive. Some people would say they expected it. I would tell you I didn't. To be quite honest, I've never seen a team lose this much and play this well. Now, there's a couple reasons for that. One, I do think the schedule has been somewhat forgiving, and I do think that the College Football Playoff Committee took that into consideration, whereas Tennessee's beaten Alabama at home and won at LSU. Georgia holds up the neutral site victory over Oregon. And you heard Tim Tebow say, if that game was 2 weeks ago, we'd still be talking about it. Well, it wasn't. And maybe it's better it wasn't, because I didn't think Georgia played particularly well against Missouri 3 games ago, or really in the first half against Auburn 2 games ago when they didn't score in the first half. There was a bit of a lull. Then came the Vanderbilt game, and we saw Georgia put 55 points on the board, kind of a get-right game. And you needed that going into the bye week. I felt like Georgia hit at a lull and needed to get some momentum going, and they had that. And then they played Florida last week, and that was kind of a mixed bag of the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? So the good was that Jalen Carter came back. You heard me mention number 88 to Tim Tebow. He's the preeminent interior defensive lineman in the nation. He's going to push the pocket, which everyone agrees is going to be the key to this game, getting Hendon Hooker off platform. The bad, you saw Stetson Bennett throw a couple interceptions and complete only 50% of his passes against the Florida defense that, quite frankly, ranks outside the top 100 in a couple of major statistical categories. It hasn't been real sharp. And then the ugly, the loss of Nolan Smith and to the torn pectoral muscle. He underwent surgery on Thursday for that torn pec, and clearly he was Georgia's sack leader. And now Georgia needs to turn to Robert Beal first and foremost to step up at that position. Now, the good news is Robert Beal's been here before. I flashed back to last year when Georgia played Florida and Adam Anderson was the team captain. And then, of course, Adam was subsequently dismissed, involved in investigation, eventual charges off field. And then Robert Beal had to step in. And we said, oh, my gosh, nobody can replace Adam Anderson. He's big, he's fast, he's strong. He leads the team in sacks. And Robert Beal comes in and ends up leading the team in sacks over the course of the season. You plugged in a fifth-year senior, and you're saying, man, it doesn't get much better than that. Well, hold my beer, as they say. 1 year later, you lose Nolan Smith. Now you plug in a sixth-year senior with Robert Beal, right? And there'll be some other guys, MJ Sherman, get some opportunities there as well. Chaz Chambliss will now get. But for the most part, Robert Beal is the guy that steps into these shoes. And, I did a story about that last night on what Josh Heupel said about this, the Tennessee coach. I was up in Knoxville all week. He said, look, there's no drop-off. They're going to keep rotating guys in. They have other talented players, and he certainly knows about Robert Beal. Robert Beal had a sack and 2 quarterback hurries in Georgia's win over Tennessee last year. So Josh Heupel's familiar with Robert Beal, and Josh Heupel knows there's not going to be any drop-off on the defensive front. Georgia's going to keep throwing bodies, going to keep throwing 5 stars. We saw Jeff Sentell with an article earlier this week on DawgNation. Georgia with 18 5-star players and Tennessee with 2, right? So, this is a contrast of a highly talented football team, kind of a work in progress with a lot of younger guys that are filling shoes as Georgia has maintained that number 1 championship element to them against a really experienced Tennessee team, maybe not as talented on the front end, but you look around and, Hendon Hooker turns 25 in a week or two. And, they've got some guys back, on the offensive line and defensive line that I remember when I covered Tennessee 5 years ago. So that's an experienced team. Cooper Mays, Cade Mays' younger brother, he's the center. He'll be lining up across from Jalen Carter. That's going to be one of the key matchups in this football game is how does Tennessee protect against 88 Jalen Carter? If Jalen Carter can push the pocket and disrupt Hendon Hooker, disrupt that timing. You heard Tebow talking about him having to try to throw over the top or, potential passing, tip passes. Because the one thing that slows a hurry-up offense, in addition to turnovers, obviously, is incomplete passes. You get an incomplete pass, and everything slows down. And that's why Tennessee is going to try to be very, I think, efficient between second and third down because they don't want to give Georgia the opportunity to substitute. You see a lot of times Georgia has these exotic blitz packages, right, that they'll bring out on third down, and you'll see a lot of these personnel shifts that Georgia will make where they'll bring in this package or that package. Well, if you're running the hurry up and if Tennessee doesn't substitute, that means Georgia can't substitute either. So you're going to see a lot of hurry up and turn around between second and third down as Tennessee attempts to keep Georgia's third down personnel out of the game, keep their packages out of the game as well. It makes things a lot more predictable and easier for Josh Heupel to handle. Heupel, by the way, when he was asked about the crowd noise, because I really think that's going to be a factor, Heupel said, you know what, he thinks his team's going to manage it. He knows to expect a loud and crazy environment, but Tennessee's been there before. Heupel has also handled Kirby Smart defenses before. You think about it, you go back and look when Heupel was at Oklahoma as the offensive coordinator. When Heupel was at Missouri, 2 years as an offensive coordinator, he faced Kirby Smart defenses. When Heupel was at Tennessee last year, and he's averaged about 29 points. And 30's kind of been the magic number when you look at how effective Josh Heupel is. Games 30 points or more, preponderance of wins. Whereas Kirby Smart, I believe, is about 2-9 when the opponent scores 30 or more points. So now that doesn't mean that Georgia can't win a shootout if that's what happens on Saturday. I mean, we're not sure. I mean, but Todd Monken's teams have put up a lot of points this year. I told you earlier in this program, Georgia is number 2 in total offense. And the Dogs, I believe, are top 10 in scoring as well. So it's not like Georgia can't score points. But there's no doubt that if Kirby Smart has his druthers, he's going to keep his offense on the field, keep the Tennessee offense off the field, and avoid a shootout. Right now, Tennessee, conversely, they're going to pressure Stetson Bennett. They're going to press those receivers on the perimeter, and they're going to challenge Stetson Bennett to throw deep over the top. If Georgia scores fast, Tennessee looks at it that, well, hey, we're going to get our offense right back on the field. So it's kind of a battle of wills, a contrast of styles, whereas, Kirby's going to want to be deliberate. I think he's going to want to take time off the clock. I think he's going to want to run the ball effectively, do everything that he can to play physical against Tennessee on offense and defense. I think Tennessee, conversely, is going to want this up-tempo game. Now, I know you've heard so much about, Tennessee runs the ball too, and they're committed to it, and yada, yada. Well, guess what? Georgia's going to take that part away. They're going to force Tennessee to throw the football. There's no doubt in my mind Kirby's going to do whatever he's got to do to get Hendon Hooker to put the ball in the air. Some bad things can happen when a quarterback goes back to throw. I mean, the ball could be tipped. Hooker could be sacked. Hooker could be, take a hit. You can throw an incompletion or you can throw an interception. It's very difficult against the Georgia defense to be consistent throwing the ball. Anthony Richardson found that out last week. And I think Anthony Richardson is a better talent at quarterback than Hendon Hooker. I understand Hendon Hooker has these ridiculous numbers, 21 touchdowns, 1 interception. He's very efficient. He's very consistent. He's very poised. He's got a great supporting cast. Hyatt, his receiver, leads the nation with 14 touchdown catches. This is a guy with some real juice, real fast. Think Arian Smith level speed. If you were to put Richardson in that offense, I think he would produce too. So it's not like Georgia hasn't seen a mega talented quarterback because I believe Anthony Richardson's it. I think he's a better runner than Hendon Hooker, and I think he has a stronger arm than Hendon Hooker. He hasn't been as consistent, and he hasn't been as accurate, but he also hasn't had the protection, and he hasn't had the open receiver. So kind of a lot to think about there in terms of what Georgia is going up against here. And Hendon Hooker, he's a talented guy. He's a poised guy. He's been on the mark. This is a very disciplined, well-practiced football team. But at the same time, Georgia has gotten better and better and better. So you can't really complain about the Bulldogs' schedule being a little bit weaker, right? So that might have taken a little bit away from the luster in terms of how they looked in the college football playoff committee eyes. But I think that schedule allowed Georgia to really grow into this year. And I think that was important when you looked at everything they had to replace. We've seen the defensive line numbers high and low. These are guys that weren't household names last year. They weren't getting the majority of the snaps. Tramel Waltower, right? You just see these guys get better and better and better and better. Jamon Dumas-Johnson at the Mike linebacker. I think he's risen now. I don't know if we're ready to say that he's as effective as Nakobe Dean was there yet, but I think we're certainly getting to that part of the conversation, where we might say, hey, this guy's pretty good. He's pretty talented. He's tough. The identity of the Georgia Bulldogs is really starting to surface. You're really starting to see what this team is made of and some of these wins and some of the adversity they had to go through, whether it was being 10 points down against Missouri or whether it was giving up 17 consecutive points against Florida at one juncture in that game. And suddenly, the cocktail party became an 8-point game. And all of a sudden you're wondering, how is Georgia going to respond now that it's 28-20? And, I think you saw Georgia's true colors in that moment. The way Stetson Bennett came back, he fired a strike over the middle. Marcus Rosemy, Jack Saint. You saw Kenny McIntosh running over people. You saw Dejon Edwards come in and find his success. Of course, in the first half, we'd watched Brock Bowers dominate with 4 catches and over 100 yards, route to a career-high 154-yard game. He was virtually unstoppable in the first half. Washington made some big drop in that game, but for the most part, Darnell has been extremely consistent. You've got to think the way that Tennessee is going to play this game tomorrow, pressing those perimeter receivers and challenging Stetson to go downfield. You've got to think it's going to be another big game for Brock Bowers, Darnell Washington, and Kenny McIntosh. Kenny McIntosh is the ultimate safety valve. Obviously, we've seen more of Kenny running between the tackles. When I asked Kirby about that, he said, "Oh, you guys make too much out of this." And I'm thinking, well, not really, because we really haven't seen a lot of the zone runs between the tackles. And, it's almost like, well, Kirby, don't get mad at us that's not what's happened for your team. But, he was pretty sensitive to that question. But the fact of the matter is we haven't seen Georgia, look like they have between the tackles in past years. You haven't seen that level of physicality. This has been a little bit more of a horizontal team. We've seen a lot of those quick passes out on the perimeter, right? Those now screens, those high percentage, what Kirby Smart calls long handoffs, because they're very efficient passes and they serve the same purpose as the run game does in terms of keeping the clock moving, high percentage pass, 4 or 5 yards at a time with the potential to break it if your back can make a move and get by 1 or 2 people. And that's kind of been the modus operandi we've seen for the Georgia Bulldogs. We haven't seen as much vertical pass game as we've seen in the past. Last year it was a lot of RPO, play action, shot play. Stetson pulls the ball out, Stetson throws it deep. Haven't seen as much of that. Teams are kind of on to that, I feel. They're loaded up against that Georgia run, and they're making Georgia run. It feels like Georgia's running West Coast offense with high percentage, short passes, make yards after the catch. That's what the metrics show us. When you looked at the quarterbacks and how many yards they'd thrown for on air yards, right, on passes that traveled more than 20 yards through the air, you saw a lot of Georgia passes that were shorter than that, and the majority of the yardage came after the catch. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's high percentage football. And when you've got players like Brock Bowers and Darnell Washington and Kenny McIntosh that can make yards after the catch, it's a smart play. But teams have picked up on that. Missouri picked up on that. They played that tight coverage. Sometimes they played very daring coverage and didn't give much help on the back end to their cornerbacks at cover 1 or cover 0, which refers to the number of safeties that are involved in the zone concept on the back end. So you've seen teams with a very aggressive plan, and you know that Tennessee's going to come with that as well. Now, keys to this game, we had Jeremy Pruitt on our Monday night show on the beat, and you heard Coach Pruitt talk about turnovers. You heard Coach Pruitt talk about special teams play. He's convinced that Georgia's going to block a field goal. And then he talked about explosive plays. And I'm going to take it one step further. I think the first quarter is going to be very important. Now, don't get me wrong. It's not that Tennessee can't come back if they fall behind, or if Georgia can't come back if they fall behind. But it's going to be a big advantage to be playing ahead, because that's going to allow whoever's calling the offense, whether it's Monken or Heupel, they're going to be in their comfort zone, and they're going to be able to call plays as they see fit, more so than in a situational manner, right? You don't want to fall too far behind if you're Georgia. Not a lot of experience coming from behind. You saw coming from behind against Missouri was quite a struggle. They were very fortunate that Missouri had a penalty at the 1-yard line and ended up settling for a field goal. And they were also very fortunate Kenny McIntosh was able to convert on a 4th and 2 run in the fourth quarter. I mean, Georgia was really living dangerously in Columbia, South Carolina. So I think we're going to have is it Reese Davis that's going to be coming here in a bit? David Pollock will be up next, so let's stand by for David Pollock.
It's in there. It's in the office. I just couldn't wear it. Hey, we got a nice game this week.
Yeah.
I'm actually on the staff now.
It's
It's been awesome. It's been freaking fantastic.
I've been killing it this year.
Yes. 10-0 after the night off.
With y'all being here this week, will you be able to go sideline this week?
Yeah, as soon as I'm done with PTI, I scoot right down to Flowery Branch just to coach the Titans. So yeah, of course.
Last year, kind of a surprising season, for the second half, but this year, 10-0, just blowing out everybody in your region. I mean, what have you seen from them to kind of make that switch now where they
That's
are?
what I'm talking about. We're here at Georgia, Tennessee, 1 versus 3, and we're talking about the North Dakota Titans. That's what I'm talking about. That's amazing. No, I mean, this defense is legit. It's been legit all year long. So I think that's been crazy. But offensively, KB's just taking it all to another new level. I mean, he's been insane. He's really taken his. That's why you see the offers coming in from all the major universities. So he's been dynamic, and then Max running the football. The offensive line getting better as the year goes along. Survived 2 games early with South Forsyth, and since then hasn't been a big challenge yet. So looking forward to the playoffs, baby.
David, you obviously play a lot of great SEC games and opponents. We've seen Eric Ainge talk about Sanford Stadium and not making much of a difference. You're on defense. When you played at Sanford Stadium, did you feel like the crowd affected games? And where's Ainge coming from with
I like the way you phrase that, so you can use that. I like that. That's experience right there. This is a stupid atmosphere. It's silly, man. It's so awesome. It was one of my favorite things about Athens. It's why I came to Georgia. I remember being a recruit, and I remember 2000 being Georgia-Tennessee, and us winning and ripping the goalpost down. And I think that's the day I figured out, like, I wanted to go to Georgia. So insane atmosphere. And in all these games, I think the hardest thing in college football to do is win on the road. I think it's one of the toughest things, especially in this league. And I think the crowd will have a big factor in the football game.
What about the hurry up? Again, your experience against a team like that, I know the rules have changed a little bit more conducive. What's the Georgia game plan to try and slow down a team like that?
Well, I think your offense has a lot to do with that. If you can play good offense and score, you can put them in the bind too, and you can get their defense tired. If you're looking, it's kind of a tennis analogy to me. Like, can you hold serve a couple times? Can you get the offense off the field? They're going to get theirs. Like, if you think Georgia's defense is 10 points a game, you're going to come out here and shut down Tennessee, and you're a Georgia fan, you're going to watch the wrong game. Like, Tennessee's going to score points. They're that good. The spacing, the speed, it just creates matchups that are very difficult to stop. But I think in the end, offensively, can you put pressure on the Georgia offense? Who makes the mistakes? Who gets a couple stops will go a big way and obviously determine actually the first quarter will be the biggest tell. When you look at Tennessee, 103-30 this season in the first quarter. Like, that's the tell. Like, they are tough to rep in practice, tough to replicate. And so I think that how you start the game is a big deal.
Talking about that Georgia offense, statistically, you see Tennessee atop the country, and just behind them, Georgia feels like they're being overlooked a little bit. Would you say so? And is that a credit to Todd Monken and what he's done?
I think Todd's done a great job. This offense with Stetson is definitely different than it was a year ago. Last year, you think about this offense, it was like, don't screw it up, don't screw it up. Now I think you've seen they're going to let him throw it. And Brock Bowers is the deal. Like, he's the deal. He's the best. If you're going to ask me to pick go through my list of top 5 players in college football, I'm not getting past 5 with him. I mean, he's just what he does for this team sets the tone for everything that they do. And his ability to play on the perimeter and win against corners, and then you got corners that got to try to get in his way and try to get by him when he blocks somebody. Darnell Washington, like, that 1-2 punch really is the tone setters of this. There's the tone setting of this offense. I think Stetson's feet now, when in games like this, when you need it, becomes more of a factor. Like, he can pull it. We know that. He's a great athlete. So, does anybody outside at wide receiver make some plays? Because I think that when you look at this offense, that's been the weakness the last several weeks. Like, McConkey needs to make some plays. Aaron Smith is healthy, and he's a burner. You can tell. So can he make some plays? But I think the offense is in a good spot. But it would definitely will feel pressure when you go against an offense like this that can score.
Georgia's defense. You've seen Tennessee's offense. If you were Kirby, if you were Glenn, if you were Will, how would you try and match up against that Tennessee offense?
Well, I don't care about yards. I swallow my pride when it comes to yards. Just don't give up big plays. When you get in the red, you're going to have to punch it in the mouth. Because remember, the way they space from sideline to sidelines, it creates so much space. And when you get in the fringe area, in the red zone, I don't have to cover as much space. So I don't have to be worried about that as much. And I think you become a much better defense because it becomes easier. So I think be great in the red is the biggest key.
If this game turns into a 4-quarter shootout, how confident are you in Georgia's offense to keep up with Tennessee's offense if it turns into that type of game?
Well, I think great teams, you have to be able to win different ways. And I think you probably would have said, are you confident when you played Alabama and Stetson's down by 2 score or down by a score late in the fourth quarter? How confident do you feel? And I think they've kind of answered that time and time again. So I trust this offense. I think they're really, really good. I also trust Tennessee's offense. I think Tennessee's offense is really good. So I think if it's, I wouldn't be surprised if it's a shootout. You know, that's not going to surprise me. I think it will be.
Can Jalen Carter be effective in a game? I mean, the game moves so fast. What does a guy like number 88 mean to a game like this?
Did you just say, can Jalen Carter be effective?
To what extent can Jalen Carter be effective?
If you watch Jalen Carter, I want you to go find a better defensive tackle in college. I want you to go find a more dominant defensive lineman, including Will Anderson. So that'll answer your question. Y'all have a good one.
Thanks,
I like that. Trying to get me to say something about Eric.
Recent fun stats that he's supposed to be able to finish.
So you heard from David Pollock there, and obviously some questions early on about North Oconee High School, where he's been helping out, coach the staff. Nice local media here, excited about high school football, part of the scene here in Georgia, certainly across the state where they have the best high school football, arguably in the country. And David excited about being a part of that North Oconee high school playoff run. But the big game tomorrow, and you could tell Pollock's juices get flowing when he starts talking about Sanford Stadium and the crowd and how much energy they bring. Certainly, David, a legend with all the awards that he won, his efficiency. And, I was actually covering Tennessee, as I said, during that era. And I remember in 2001 when Tennessee beat Florida in Steve Spurrier's final game at the Swamp. And we just all assumed, once Spurrier was leaving, it's like, okay, it's Tennessee's turn now. Philip Fulmer and Tennessee have dethroned Florida. Spurrier's left. And along came Mark Richt and David Pollock and David Green. And they were an absolute nightmare for the Tennessee Vols at the start of this millennium. Tennessee did not assume control of the SEC. Yes, they won in 2001 and played Nick Saban's LSU in the SEC championship game and fell short. But and Tennessee returned to the SEC championship game again in 2004 with Eric Ainge. I believe actually Rick Clausen would have been playing by then. I think Eric got injured that season, and where they lost to an undefeated Auburn. But the point is right when you think something's going to happen or assume that someone's got next, a guy like David Pollock, a legend, emerges. Mark Richt emerges. Georgia got in the way of Tennessee before when the Vols thought they were going to march and become national champions with the likes of a Casey Clausen and a Jason Witten, Albert Hainsworth, Dante Stallworth. We go down the line with all these future stars, couldn't get past the Georgia Bulldogs. Now, Ainge won a couple games in Sanford Stadium. He wants everybody to know that. So he's talked a lot about the stadium not making a lot of noise. I absolutely believe that is a false narrative. Now, maybe in some way, shape, or form, I think Connor Riley refers to this as a galaxy theory. Maybe in some way, shape, or form, Tennessee believes that if the crowd's loud, it'll actually inhibit the Georgia defense from communicating, and they would rather have that than have their offense be able to communicate. I'm not sure about that. Hendon Hooker is a veteran. A lot of these guys are back. I have seen situations where defenses have been at a disadvantage when there's been noise. I remember covering a game at Oregon with Marcus Mariota and the Oregon Ducks, and I was covering Michigan State. And it seemed to me like Oregon wanted the crowd loud when Michigan State was on the field because they weren't able to communicate and call out these switches when Oregon was running a lot of pick plays. So maybe Tennessee's crazy like a fox, trying to charge up this Georgia environment, trying to make it as loud as possible. Maybe Josh Heupel secretly thinks it's to his advantage if the crowd is really loud and maybe the Georgia defense can't communicate. Maybe that's in his mind Tennessee's advantage, but I have a hard time believing that because I've seen how Georgia can absolutely take advantage of that noise. Again, the 2019 Notre Dame game, one of maybe 3 or 4 times in 30 years I've covered college football that I've seen a crowd absolutely make a difference. 6 false starts, 3 timeouts burned, 2 of them in the second half, and Notre Dame simply ran out of time. I'll tell you what else. I went back and I was listening to Brian Kelly's press conference after that 2019 game. I said, you know what? This is the last time that Sanford Stadium was truly lit. I mean, the games are always loud to a degree, but that night against Notre Dame in 2019, it was special. Now, they debuted the red lights. I know the crowd was excited about that, but there was another element to that game that I believe is going to transition, transfer, whatever you want to say, be present on Saturday at 3:30. Brian Kelly said that was one of the most physical football environments that he'd ever been a part of. Now, remember, Brian Kelly goes back a long way. Before Notre Dame, it was Cincinnati, and then it was Central Michigan, and then it was Grand Valley State. This is a guy that's been around a long, long, long time, and even said that. And that was one of the most physical games that he ever coached. You better believe that this is going to be one of the most physical football games that you have ever laid eyes on. That is the way Georgia plays by nature. But as stoked up as these Bulldogs figure to be, not only by the College Football Playoff Committee, stealing their number one ranking and enforcing Kirby Smart's message that you ain't there yet, sending the message to Georgia, you're undefeated, but we think Tennessee's better. That absolutely helped Georgia when it comes to the intangibles department. It absolutely would be on the bulletin board, and you can bet that it's going to be on the bulletin board that Eric Ainge doesn't think that the Georgia crowd and the Georgia team is going to be able to respond. And meanwhile at Tennessee, and I was up there all week, and I don't know, some people thought that was curious, and I guess they haven't been paying attention to DawgNation because we've been coming live from every location. We were in South Carolina. We were in Florida last week. We were in Auburn during game week. We want to know the other side of the story. Obviously, we canvass this side quite well every day at 10 a.m. with DawgNation Daily and certainly Connor Riley and Jeff Santel on the recruiting. But we want to give you both sides of the story. And by going to these other locations, we've been able to do that. And this week in Knoxville, I can confirm that there's a lot of confidence. And Josh Heupel is as relaxed and confident as people are saying that he is. In fact, Josh Heupel took the time while answering a question yesterday to point out that I was wearing a red pullover. I have never had a coach in the middle of a press conference question me about what color clothes I was wearing. Now, I've had coaches behind the scenes at a Tennessee practice back in the day. Philip Fulmer didn't like it that I was wearing a maroon pullover during Alabama week. It didn't say Alabama on it, but the color was too close, and the coach was fired up. And he said, "What are you wearing that Alabama shirt?" I said, "It's not an Alabama shirt." Heupel says, "That's a bright shade of red you're wearing." Well, it is, but it's also Under Armour, and this is not a Georgia, but that is how fired up and edgy these coaches are. So Heupel can be relaxed and confident, but at the same time, he's edgy. And that tells you everything, right? Like he wanted to know, what's this Georgia reporter doing in my press conference where all these other questions are, how great is this and how great is that, and how wonderful did you feel? And and suddenly I'm bringing a dose of reality saying, hey, your former quarterback saying that the crowd's not going to be a factor. What do you think? He didn't like that question. I understand, but it's a question and it's legitimate because it either is or isn't going to be a factor. And Josh says, you know what? The crowd is going to be something to manage, but he said he's confident that his team can handle it. So that's Tennessee's attitude. They're an 8-point underdog, but you would think they were an 18-point favorite based on the interviews and the mood up there. And I'm not saying that you should blame them. I mean, they've had a wonderful season. They finally conquered Alabama and Florida in the same season. I'm trying to think back when the last time that happened, that they swept all three, probably 1998. I'm pretty sure that Georgia beat Tennessee in 2001. Was it at the Hobnail boot game? That's what comes to mind. It's been a long time since Tennessee has swept all three, but when they beat Florida, and DawgNation covered that kind of took the roof off or the ceiling off. Now all of a sudden, the mentality at Tennessee is, once you beat Florida, anything can happen. So many years, Steve Spurrier would derail the Vols in September. Seasons would be ruined before they got started. Once they beat the Gators, the confidence really started to steam. The team has stayed focused. It is an experienced team. It's a mature team. It's a poised team. Hendon Hooker embodies that. Everybody feeds off of Hendon Hooker. He's a very spiritual guy, prays before every game. Also got a Mercedes NIL deal this week, I might add. So maybe that was the answer to his prayers in terms of NIL dealings. Meanwhile, Stetson's got to deal with an onion farm. So quite the contrast in Stetson Bennett and Hendon Hooker and NIL deals, although I think Stetson's doing just fine. I think he's over $1 million now in endorsement deals. But it's kind of interesting when you contrast the teams, really. Right from the top down, you think about Josh Heupel, offensive mind, national championship quarterback at Oklahoma, Heisman Trophy runner-up, a super mega talented arm talent guy with incredible poise and calmness. And then you've got Kirby Smart. kind of the lion in the cage. I mean, here's a guy that was deemed too small, probably headed for Troy State if Georgia hadn't offered. Ray Goff made no secret about it. If Kirby's dad wasn't a high school coach, he wouldn't have got the scholarship offer. It took a Tennessee guy, Steve Johnson, flipping on signing day for Kirby to get that scholarship on game day. And then he works his way into the starting lineup and becomes a team captain. In addition to an all-SEC academic selection, Kirby becomes an all-SEC safety, and you can still see his name in the record books among the Georgia leaders for interception. Now, neither one of these players, Heupel or Kirby, went on to play in the NFL, but they're college football legends in their own right. Certainly now that they're the head coaches at their programs. The difference is, I truly believe that if Josh Heupel has the opportunity one day to go to Oklahoma, that might be something he would have to consider. I don't say that he would do it, but I do think it's something he would have to consider because it's his alma mater. Whereas Kirby, this is the destination, right? Kirby doesn't want to go anywhere else. Kirby is all about Georgia. He waited for this opportunity. It had to be the right time. He had an opportunity to come back here and work for Mark Richt. I believe after the 2009 season, he stayed at Alabama. Bided his time, and when it was the right time, it was the right time. Mark Richt obviously left this program in tremendous shape. They were able to get some facilities going once Kirby got here. About $240 million going into facilities since Kirby Smart's been hired. And then you think about his contract, another $112 million, and his assistant's contract, maybe the highest paid coach of staff of assistants in the nation. I mean, this university has committed and gone all in financially on winning championships. Now, Tennessee is on the way back. This NIL model, make no mistake about it, it favors Tennessee. Tennessee has a larger base for the NIL, deeper pocketed boosters than Georgia. Now, wait a minute. We're going to say, how can you say that, Mike? Well, I can say it because I know it, because all you got to do is look at the buildings on their campus. All you got to do is look at the facilities. All you got to do is look at how Tennessee changed their state laws to work around NIL, where NIL companies can deal directly with high school students. It's a different commitment to the NIL. Tennessee, very proactive, very aggressive. Georgia trying to catch up. Florida trying to catch up. I know this is the underbelly of college sports. Nobody wants to talk about players being paid, but it's absolutely factoring in. You look at Tennessee's next incoming quarterback, reportedly an $8 million deal. I mean, it's a lot of NIL money. Arch Manning didn't pick a school based on NIL, but you better believe that Texas is going to have a lot of tens of millions of dollars waiting for that player because of the hype that his commitment brought and his talent as well. And Georgia right now working on their NIL model. Georgia working on a lot of athletic models with second-year athletic director Josh Brooks. I mean, these are things that on the surface you say, well, those kind of details. But these are the things that make a difference. There is a trickle-down effect. Georgia has the momentum right now. They are the reigning national champions. They are number one in the polls. They bring an 8-0 record into their home stadium, where they have the fifth largest home winning streak in the nation. Active right now as things stand, have not lost at home since 2019 when Blankenship missed a field goal and the ball bounced all sorts of different ways. You got to go back 3 years for a Georgia home loss. Lots of momentum for Georgia, and if they win this ball game tomorrow, the momentum will be sustained, and that's going to give them more operating room for this NIL formula that everyone is racing to figure out. It'll make the school more attractive. The scary thing for Georgia, if they lose this game, and I know this is, maybe we're getting ahead of ourselves, but the remainder of the schedule does not feature a top 25 team. It would be very difficult for Georgia to make the college football playoff with a loss. We've been down this road before. 2018, we saw an outstanding Georgia team that had just lost to Alabama by 7 points, get aced out by a Big 12 champion Oklahoma with one fewer loss. And Georgia does not want to confront that situation, right? Kirby wants to control the team's destiny. I guarantee you that he's told him that. You don't want to put this in the hands of the college football playoff committee. They ain't going to be good to you. It would take a lot of different things. Georgia faces a must-win game tomorrow if they're going to make the college football playoff. Tennessee, a little bit more of a margin for error because they beat Alabama earlier this year, because they beat LSU earlier this year. So should Tennessee lose this game and win out and finish with one loss, if Alabama wins the SEC with one loss, the Tennessee resume looks a lot better in that sense. So I don't think anybody's planning on losing. I don't think anybody's drawing up the what ifs, but obviously our DawgNation audience likes to be informed, wants to know the magnitude and understand. It's not just one-on-one in the history books. when people, and this won't be the last time this happens, by the way, there's going to be more one-on-one matchup. The media polls and the coaches poll aren't always going to agree with the College Football Playoff Committee poll. And that may seem a bit confusing because polls are polls after all, right? I look at the College Football Playoff Committee as more of a jury, right? And the judge is telling them, you're not allowed to consider anything but this season and this season alone. Well, of course, that's ridiculous, right? I think we saw that Alabama had some consideration from past years. A one-loss Alabama was ahead of an undefeated TCU in this year's college football rankings. Now, you can't tell me that that's based on this year alone. Obviously, there's some bias. Obviously, there's some influence that, well, it's Alabama and Nick Saban, so we're going to give them the benefit of the doubt and put them ahead of an undefeated Big 12 team. But I think for the most part, the College Football Playoff Committee was geared towards this year and this year only. Now, I brought up on the phone call with the College Football Playoff Executive Director, the committee chairman, Boo Corrigan. I can't resist. What we're doing this like on Halloween, right? His name was Boo, or the day after Halloween. You just kind of go, okay, Stranger Things. But and Boo says, right, that it's this explosive offense that Ohio State has. It's how impressive Tennessee's look. And I said, yeah, the common opponent. Georgia and Tennessee have both played Florida. Tennessee played Florida at home and won 38-33. Georgia played Florida on a neutral site and won 42-20. I mean, where's the transitive properties in that? I mean, that's the one thing I wanted to have. And yet, that wasn't like part of the consideration. So I thought that was very interesting that that wasn't as much of a factor as maybe some of the statistics that they looked at, some of the more impressive wins. So we're going to be joined by Reese Davis here in just a moment. Let's get ready for him here as this DawgNation special from the campus continues.
Sports Center hits.
Ooh.
That was a good catch.
Got a lot of experience catching the ball on campus. Unfortunately,
Well, I guess Reese Davis has been delayed on his way over here. So we'll talk a little bit more about this scene that's being set up. It's kind of unique to see both ESPN Game Day and SEC Nation on the same campus the same weekend. Typically, you'll see them split up. You'll see the Paul Feinbaum crew with Tim Tebow. They'll go to one campus. And then, of course, Pollock and Kirk Herbstreit. We'll see those guys go to another campus. So, but just the sheer magnitude of this game, I guarantee you this put everybody into scramble mode. I think I heard rumor that, Fox Sports was even trying to get on campus. It's like it just snuck up on us. We knew Georgia was having a good season, but, and I'll admit, when Tennessee beat Alabama, it was kind of oh my gosh, what do we do with our plans now? I mean, I'll tell you in full transparency, I cut my trip to Gainesville short. I was going to spend 3 days there. I said, you know what? I ain't spending 3 days in this alligator place. I'll spend 1 day because I got to be in Knoxville next week, because that's the story, right? Suddenly, Josh Heupel in Tennessee become the story. One of my questions, can they handle it? Are they really ready for the spotlight yet? I mean, when is the last time that Tennessee really handled the spotlight? I can tell you the answer. It was 1998 when they had a guy named Al Wilson. Who's that guy on defense right now? Who's going to calm that defense down when Brock Bowers catches the pass and goes 40 yards, or when Darnell Washington trucks 2 defenders on a 3rd and 8, or when Kenny McIntosh cuts back against the grain and goes 40 yards? Who's the guy in the huddle on defense to calm those nerves? All of this talk has been about the Tennessee offense, and it's almost like people got amnesia. They played a game at Pitt and they only scored 3 touchdowns. I talked to Narduzzi the next week, knew him at Michigan State well. He's watching the Alabama game and he says, "What are they doing?" Well, I'll tell you what they were doing. They were trying to single cover Jalen Hyatt, the most effective receiver in college football. Kirby Smart's not going to do that. When we talked with Jeremy Pruitt about this Monday night, and you can see this on our YouTube channel and on DawgNation.com, Jeremy Pruitt said, yeah, Georgia can get a lot out of that Alabama tape. They can learn what not to do. So you're going to see a different game plan from Georgia than Nick Saban had. Probably one of his greatest failings as a head coach in terms of the game plan and the poor clock management at the end. You better believe Kirby's going to have a better plan. We're going to ask Reese Davis about that here in just a moment.
What did you call Jacksonville? No. Yes, you have to. Where are you from? Not so where. Okay. Huh? Georgia Tech.
Yeah, good cookies.
How were you?
Reese, I asked you a few weeks ago when I saw you up in Knoxville about Stetson Bennett, and you had quite the presentation on Stetson. How important will Stetson be in this game tomorrow?
They have to turn him loose, and I think fully capable of making plays. Tennessee's defense is better than maybe the raw stats would indicate. You do a little bit deeper dive, a little bit better job stopping the run, but they are a little boomer bust, and that can play into the very best of Stetson and also to the occasional mistake that he's been prone to from time to time. So I think he plays a huge role in the game, and he needs to be turned loose to make plays. I don't think you're going to see Georgia say, "Hey, let's just run the ball and keep it away," because we're so afraid of Tennessee. I don't believe that's how to play out.
This is your third time at a UT football game this season. Have you seen anything like that happen here before?
In terms of us seeing, yeah, I mean, we've seen a lot of Alabama in years past. We were here at Georgia 2 times in 3 weeks, and then ended up seeing him in the championship game last year. So when a team gets going and really becomes a story the way Tennessee has, I don't think it's really unusual, because we always say that we try to follow the best story every week, and Tennessee's been the best story of the year up to this point.
What is that story?
A resurgent program that's exciting to watch, that has a chance to virtually win their division. And if not, they can't officially obviously lock up anything, but you're hard pressed to find a scenario if Tennessee wins tomorrow for them not making the college football playoff. Could they lose in the SEC championship game? Yeah, but even then, I mean, they're probably going to get in. I mean, you don't know what else is going to happen around the country, but the stakes are gargantuan. It's been a story of redemption for a lot of the players, guys like Hendon, really like Josh Heupel, who earlier in his career was fired as the offensive coordinator at Oklahoma, and all of these guys are proving that they can win at the highest level.
Can you put this game into perspective in terms of the 1 versus 1 element of it? It seems like it's just kind of snuck up on us, like, oh my goodness, we're in the first time ever situation.
Well, it's not the first time ever. Alabama and LSU in 2019 was 1 versus 1, and Michigan State and Notre Dame in 1966 was also 1 versus 1 in terms of the major ranking services at the time. But it is extraordinarily rare. And the way I've described this is this has been a nice rivalry. This rivalry has been full of memorable moments, but not necessarily momentous occasions. This is by a million miles the biggest Georgia-Tennessee game ever. And I don't think there's anything that touches it and comes close to it. I mean, you've got
whether it's Herschel or touchdown, my God, a touchdown. He stood up and hit the fullback. We stepped on their face with a hobnail boot and crushed their nose. Wait, no, broke their nose. We crushed their face. I'm sorry, Uncle Larry, I missed the quote. But, I mean, those are memorable moments. But life went on, after that. The Dobbs nail boot game, great moment for Tennessee, and then they sort of faded away. Georgia wasn't that great. It's been an odd series in that when Georgia's been elite, Tennessee hasn't. When Tennessee's been elite, Georgia hasn't. Obviously, somebody listening will pick out 2 years here and there where they were both really good. But not like this. And to me, this is by far the biggest game in the rivalry's history.
If I'm not mistaken, you've got Ohio State ahead of both them in your AP poll.
Because I think they would win the game. Okay. Before you ask. Right now, if they were lining up on a neutral field tomorrow, now I almost put Tennessee number 1 last week, so it's not like I think they would crush them. But you can't argue Ohio State's resume against Tennessee's. No one would ever suggest that, and I'm not. But to me, ranking teams is more art than science. And you look at the science, you look at the numbers, and you trust what your eyes see. And if you put a piece of paper in front of me and say, got to pick the winner, I would pick Ohio State to beat Tennessee. And to be honest, Tennessee's edge over Georgia, in my judgment, is a little bit more resume based. So there's, I refer to it often as a mosaic because the pieces that you use to put together the picture are not symmetrical and they're not of the same size. And in different parts of it, you might value something a little more than the other. I can tell you this, I cannot envision a scenario under which I don't vote the winner of this game number 1 next week. I might still lean Ohio State, but there comes a point when one piece of the mosaic overwhelms everything else. So whoever wins this game, I'll vote number 1 next week. Not that that matters now that the committee's out, but since you asked the question, I anticipated where you
that was going to be my question. Is pretty great for Georgia, but the Kent State and Missouri games that were not so great. How do you balance those two pieces, and where do you put a little bit more value?
I probably would put a little more value in the way they played against Oregon because they were interested. I'm a big believer in psychology and human nature, and there's not one thing, as great a motivator and as great a coach as Kirby Smart is, there's not one thing on earth he could have done to convince them that they were at risk against Kent State. And even though they turned out to actually be somewhat at risk for a little while, even into the fourth quarter, I guess, against Missouri, they weren't really. I watched that game, and there was never one moment that I thought they were going to lose until Mevis hit that one field goal. And I'm like, holy cow, they might have screwed. If they don't do something right now, they've screwed this up. And what did they do? They did something right then. And so I'm not too worried about it. Sometimes when you're a defending champion, or there's no defending, when you're a reigning champion, everybody's shooting for you. You get a little bored. And I think that's all it is in Georgia.
What do you need to see from Georgia to see more of a complete puzzle? You said this team's building and you're seeing different pieces, different places. What haven't we seen from Georgia that we think would make them more?
Explosion on the outside, apart from Bowers. Certainly he's probably the best tight end running back. I suggested that a great recruiting tool for Kirby is that on their depth chart, they should just list Brock Bowers as baller. They should just put baller and nobody else is at the position, just him. And then when they recruit guys, say, you want to play the baller position like Brock Bowers? And so I think a little more explosion around him. And probably they're going to need to find somebody that generates the pass rush. I think the good news is him capable of doing that. No, they haven't generated a ton of pass rush relative to maybe what the guys last year did, but I think they have guys capable of doing so. But you're looking for little tiny pimples on a supermodel here, right? I mean, this is an elite team, and Georgia's really good, capable of winning the game tomorrow. They're a big favorite, even though everybody seems to think Tennessee's going to win. It seems like, but Georgia's a touchdown favorite for a reason. They're good.
If this game turns into a fourth-quarter shootout, do you tip your hat to Tennessee, or do you think that Georgia's offense can keep up with them if neither defense is really making any stops?
I mean, Georgia's sixth in the country in scoring. It's not like they're coming out here with, Andy Johnson running the option. I mean, they put points on the board. So Georgia can keep up with them and they can outscore them. And it will, I think, come down to which defense gets key stops. And how well does Georgia react after explosive plays? Tennessee's getting some. I don't care how good Georgia's defense is. This Tennessee offense against last year's Georgia defense, they would get explosive plays. Now, if the explosive play goes to the house, that's a different thing. But I'm talking if you give up let's say a 35-yard chunk play, can you get back, get lined up, and stop them on first down and keep it from multiplying? Whoever does that best, or if Tennessee can force Stetson into an error and steal a possession with a turnover, those are the type things that the defenses will do to decide the game. But I have no doubt that Georgia is prolific enough on offense to score a lot of points and win a game that's played in the 40s, because it's going to take 40 to beat Tennessee. A really good defensive effort. Okay, I'll say 35 at least. A really, really good defensive effort from Georgia, in my judgment, tomorrow. We'll be holding them to 31. So the question is, can you score 35 or 32, I guess, in that case? And that's with a really good defensive effort. So
we're 8 or 9 years. We're 8 or 9 years into the college football playoff, and how have you kind of seen the landscape change nationally, going from 2-team BCS to now, late into November, we're still seeing 7 or 8 teams that can still vie for those spots.
I think it's really similar to a lot of years, but I think the difference is that you don't get the feeling, that Alabama and Clemson have been staples in this thing, that they are locks for it. They are not quite as dominant as they've been. You've got some new blood in the mix with Tennessee and TCU who are in it, and then Ohio State and Michigan are back in the mix, which they've been quite regularly, and so too is Clemson. So, I think that you see a little bit of new blood kind of mixing in and challenging the old guard. If wherever you want to put Georgia in that group, they're sort of the hybrid old guard, new guard, I guess. But so you have a little bit of more of a different feel this year as the teams getting involved.
I think the crowd will be a factor. Maurice, we've had some conversation pre-game. Former Tennessee quarterback saying he doesn't think Sanford Stadium is going to make much of a difference. Hype was confident. Kirby's encouraging the crowd. How much of a difference can Sanford Stadium make? And do you think that will end up being a factor?
I really don't, because Tennessee's been so precise and not prone to it, but it is fair that their biggest games have been in front of a cooperative crowd as opposed to a vitriolic one. And so I think that's a fair question. I suspect that, as much football as Hendon's played and their receivers have played a lot, they're prepared for it. I don't think a huge factor, but maybe in key spots. Like if you get a false start, if the crowd forces a false start on a key 3rd and 2, that could be helpful for sure. So I do think that the crowd needs to provide their team with some energy, but in terms of them being vulnerable to, say, the number of penalties that Alabama fell victim to, both at Texas and at Tennessee and Arkansas too, for that matter, I don't know that I really see that with the way this Tennessee offense has performed. All right. All right, guys. See you later. Don't know. Yeah, not sure. All right, see you guys.
So that was right. Reese Davis, obviously, with some more great analysis. Really enjoyed the SEC Network and the ESPN personalities coming out, talking about this game, kind of a unique situation with both SEC Nation and ESPN College Game Day here. A lot of different takes from the personalities, whether it was Tim Tebow or David Pollack. Reese Davis, certainly a great game on tap. The University of Georgia campus absolutely buzzing right now, and you can just tell that something special is about to happen. I like Reese pointing out some other number ones that met. It seems a little different with the College Football Playoff Committee and the AP poll and the coaches poll as well. A little bit more contested, a little bit more build-up these days. But for certain, you're going to want to catch us tonight. We got a program tonight, our Go With The Flow program on DawgNation with Brandon Adams and Jeff Santel and Connor Riley and myself. We're going to pick all these games, and you're going to get to find out which Dog Nation cast member took Tennessee in those 8 points. No hints here, but there was one of the Dog Nation reporters that took Tennessee in the 8 points. You're going to get to find that out tonight at 7 o'clock on Go With The Flow. I want to thank my producer, Michael Carvel, for making this happen. I want to appreciate, obviously, Laura Rutledge, Tim Tebow, David Pollock, Reese Davis. Really appreciated their time and their involvement in this game. They had a lot to say and certainly a lot for us to think about leading up to that 3:30 p.m. kickoff tomorrow on CBS. This is Mike Griffith from the University of Georgia campus. Everybody, have a great weekend.